Imagine this. The best pasta sauce you have ever tasted sits abandoned on a plate. Wasted sauce. That is a tragedy. If only you had used Barilla al Bronzo pasta. Its bronze-cut texture holds your sauce and scoops up every last drop. The Italians call that scarpetta. Capture sauce the Italian way. Barilla al Bronzo. Click or tap the banner to find out more.
Running a business comes with a lot of what-ifs. But luckily, there's a simple answer to them. Shopify. It's the commerce platform behind millions of businesses, including Thrive Cosmetics and Momofuku, and it'll help you with everything you need. From website design and marketing to boosting sales and expanding operations, Shopify can get the job done and make your dream a reality. Turn those what-ifs into... Sign up for your $1 per month trial at shopify.com/special offer.
Welcome to the Ivory Tower Boiler Room, an arts and culture podcast. I'm Dr. Andrew Rimby, the host and founder. Wherever you are listening, Spotify, Apple, YouTube, please do me a favor, make sure you're following the show and make sure that you rate and review us. It really means a lot, and it continues to allow me to get really exciting guests for the podcast and to continue delivering the podcast for free. Remember, though, we do have a Patreon, so if you don't want to listen to ads and you want to watch the video episodes of the podcast, patreon.com/Ivory Tower Boiler Room. Do you know that there is a book club? It's free and virtual. So easy to just join the book club in your pajamas on a Sunday afternoon. Our next book club is June 22nd at 5 p.m. We are reading Sophie Gilbert's Girl on Girl, How Pop Culture Turned a Generation of Women Against Themselves. She writes for The Atlantic. She is such an amazing pop culture expert. So if you've always wondered, wait, why did the paparazzi harass Britney Spears like that? Or did the Spice Girls really have a love-hate relationship with each other? You're going to want to read this book. So to join the book club, email ivorytowerboilerroom@gmail.com and I will give you the Zoom link, June 22nd, 5 p.m. Without further ado, and a brief message of thanks. Thank you to Mary DePippi, the chief contributor, and Christian Garcia, who edits this podcast, and my fiance and parents, who continue delivering really creative ideas my way. And without further ado, here's today's episode.
Hey, true crime friends, welcome back to another episode of True Crime in Academia. As always, I am your host, Mary DePippi. I'm sorry that I'm a little late for y'all this month. It's trade show season at work, so everything is just crazy. I meant to have this episode out last week, but again, because of all the craziness, everything just got pushed back. But here we are. And on Father's Day. So happy Father's Day to all of you dads out there. Special shout out, of course, to my dad, just for being awesome, and just being my dad. The man who got me into superheroes and baseball and basketball. And even though basketball, I really have no desire for anymore. But anyway, just my love of certain things. So, again, happy Father's Day again to my dad and all of the dads out there. Thank you all for being great and, not being the pieces of shit that create serial killers, Unlike some of the dads we're going to talk about, well, at least this stepdad anyway. For once, I have a case for you guys where the serial killer's parent, or father anyway, isn't an abusive piece of shit. Again, it's the stepfather, but an actual father is decent and close with his son, which, like I said, we will get into in this case. But again, like I said, happy Father's Day, y'all. That is also why the reason this episode is late this evening. Of course, because I had to go hang out with my dad. I stopped by, my man and I, we stopped by his parents and, said a happy Father's Day to his dad, so, we had some Father's Day festivities to go through first. So, the day kind of just got away from me. But better late than never, right? Before we get into this week's episode, I just want to touch on something that I think I've talked about on this show. Aaron Goodwin, star of Ghost Adventures, basically Zach Bagans' best friend. I remember a couple episodes of watching, he definitely felt possessed. Like, I do remember, like, Zach being like he was the guy who had to go and was like, oh yeah, I'll go in this room with you. And then they shut the door behind him and he's left in by himself. And we're like, hey buddy, yeah, no, we know you can do it. It's fine. You've got this. And meanwhile, he's like freaking out and kind of like, what the fuck? But like, like he is that kind of like that guy. Like they do make him, from the episodes that I remember, make him go into some of the batshit craziest, like, again, if you believe in that kind of thing, then, like, like these are supposedly the most haunted places within the places the buildings that they're in. So, anyway, his wife hired a hitman to kill him. And recently he, I think, gave like a victim impact statement in court. It doesn't seem like he had testified, but sadly, like he really broke down and was saying how he's now hired armed security because of her and like, just can't trust the same. And I can't imagine. I mean, I had started following him just recently before the two of them had gotten married. And I remember that the wedding had kept getting just pushed back and pushed back and pushed back because of like COVID and things like that. So, when they eventually did get married, I was like, oh my gosh, this is so great, blah, 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 blah. And then come to find out, just like a few years later after they get married, this happens. And it's just crazy. And of course, inappropriately, and I admit that this is an inappropriate thought, but also kind of funny. But like a lot of people in the comments were like, yeah, like she really tried to make him into a ghost. And again, like my brain went there as well. And I know that is so inappropriate, but like you can't help it. But again, absolutely tragic, not to take away from that. I mean, again, what he went through is extremely traumatic. Like someone, again, he loved the most, tried to kill him. Absolutely hard. So I don't know. Like I said, I think that's just a victim impact statement that they generally give at the end before sentencing. So I will try and keep you guys updated with the outcome of that and, the verdict and such. So keep an ear out for that. I have a really good episode for you guys today. We're focused more on a serial killer this time rather than a victim. But we're going to take a quick break, and when we get back, we will get into this week's case.
Summer's almost here, and as a lover of literature, bookstores, libraries, the constant question I get is, Andrew, what book should I add to my summer reading list and read at the beach this summer? And I just always had a problem trying to tell people what to read, but guess what? No more. I have a magazine that has become my best friend. It is the G&LR, the Gay and Lesbian Review, a bi-monthly magazine of all things LGBTQ arts and culture. Their current issue is called The First Homosexuals, and it is guest edited by Dr. Jonathan D. Katz, who is a professor at the University of Penn. He was the founding president of New York's Leslie Lohman Museum of Gay and Lesbian Art, which, if you've never been there, is a free museum. So definitely go there. It's in Soho and it's amazing. Back to the GNLR. This new edition is so exciting to read. It looks at how the term homosexuality is an invented term. It was invented by medical scientists in the late Victorian period. So I can't wait to read all of these articles, but there's articles talking about homosexuality in Japan, Russia, Canada, Paris, India, Argentina. And Jonathan D. Katz talks about his exhibition called The First Homosexuals, now on display in Chicago's Wrightwood Museum from May 2nd to July 26th. But I can't get to Chicago this summer, so I'm so happy that I get to look through the magazine and see all of the articles that Jonathan has put together with contributing writers. I'm interviewing Jonathan soon, so look out for that episode, everyone. The GNLR has given me an exclusive promo code. Write it down, everyone. It's ITBR Choice, and you get a free issue with your subscription. So, glreview.org, go to the subscribe section, ITBR Choice, you get a free issue, and I can't wait for you all to enjoy the GNLR as much as I do. Please let me know if you're reading the GNLR, and until next time when I have Jonathan D. Katz on.
America's beverage companies are investing in America. We're American companies, making American products with American workers in America's hometowns. We're local bottlers and manufacturers, operating in all 50 states, employing more than 275,000 Americans in good-paying jobs, delivering for the nation, because we believe in the promise of America and the people who make it great. Learn more at wedeliverforamerica.org. Paid for by the American Beverage Association.
My favorite thing about Shipt since I signed up for Target Circle 360? No price markups when I order same-day delivery from tons of local stores. Only a handful of alcohol retailers and items don't count. I won't lie, I've had too much fun being like, markups on groceries? Not in my fridge. Markups on pet food? Not for my DOG. Markups on tools, electronics, home goods, meds? Not in my house. Anyway, it's awesome. Order now at shipt.com/360. Terms apply.
So for those of you that are American Horror Story fans, some of this crime and this killer is going to sound familiar to you, and that's because it is the inspiration behind season 1, episode 2 of Murder House. It's the episode that talks about a mass murder that occurred there to a bunch of nursing students. That was inspired by the crimes of Richard Benjamin Speck. Now, Richard Speck was born on December 6, 1941 in Kirkwood, Illinois, to Benjamin Franklin Speck and Mary Margaret Carbell. Richard was number 7 of the 8 children they had together. Now, his father, Benjamin, worked as a packer at Western Stoneware, and his parents were super religious and didn't drink. And for the most part, Richard Speck's early childhood was pretty good. He was actually close to his father, which is not something we see with many serial killers. Usually, if there's an issue with the parent, more than likely it's usually the dad that is the abusive of the two, or more abusive of the two. But luckily, not in this case. Sadly, though, when Richard was just 6 years old, his father had a heart attack at just 53 years of age. His father's death did take a huge toll on the family. Again, he was very close with his father, and, everyone was absolutely devastated when his father suddenly passed away. About 3 years later, Mary remarries a man named Carl August Rudolph Lindbergh. And when she marries him, she relocates the family to Santo, Texas. Now, Carl was actually the complete opposite of Benjamin Franklin Speck, Richard's father. For one, he worked as a traveling insurance salesman and was a hard drinker. He also had a 25-year criminal record ranging from forgery to several DUIs. And as a parent, he was just absent and abusive. Now, not all of the siblings experienced this. It seemed like it was just Richard and his younger sister, Carolyn. So, children 7 and 8 of the 8 children. And at one point, they stay with one of their older sisters named Sarah, who gets married and stays with them, her and her husband. So they could basically finish school because he was only in the 2nd grade at this time, pretty much. So 2 years later, sadly, another tragedy hits the Speck family, and the oldest brother, Robert, dies in an automobile accident at just 23 years old. Over the next 12 years, the family moved frequently, living in 10 different addresses within that time. So just almost under living in one, a different place every month, which is crazy. That caused, as we know, as true crime fans and, just barely armchair psychologists, we know that is a lot of instability and what that does to a child's psyche, or at least what it can do, in worst case scenarios. Richard also struggled in school, and part of it was because he refused to wear the glasses that he needed to for reading, but he also never spoke in class because he had anxiety. So with all of that going on, and then the fact that now his mother had started drinking, the guy that she's with is an alcoholic, he himself actually starts drinking at age 12. And his first arrest happens a year later at age 13, and he's arrested for trespassing. And sadly, there will be many more arrests to come from here on out. Richard did have to repeat the 8th grade, and in the fall of 1957, he starts at Crozier Technical High School for his freshman year. Sadly, he just wasn't good at school or just didn't really care because he failed every subject and just didn't show up at all the second semester. So ultimately, he dropped out in January of 1958. After that, he pretty much starts getting drunk every single day, but is able to find some work as a laborer for the 7-Up bottling company in Dallas when he's about 19. Shortly after, he meets 15-year-old Shirley Annette Malone at the Texas State Fair. And pretty much after 3 weeks of dating, he gets her pregnant, and the couple get married on January 19th, 1962. Now, Richard was an absolute drunken, abusive piece of shit husband who would rape Shirley on a regular basis. And, she was in fear for her life. But I guess because of the baby and maybe hoping that he'll change, she stays with him, and the two move in with his younger sister Caroline and her husband, and also their mother at that point because she had separated from Lindbergh. Richard and Shirley's daughter, Robbie Lynn Speck, was born on July 5th, 1962. At the time, though, instead of being there for her birth, her father, Richard, was serving a 22-day jail sentence for disturbing the peace after a drunken fight in McKinney, Texas. The following year, at just 21 years old, Richard is arrested and sentenced to 3 years in prison for forgery and burglary. However, he was paroled in 1965 after only serving 16 months. That freedom, however, lasted him about a week because he was arrested again on January 9th, 1965 for attacking a woman in a parking lot of her apartment building with a 17-inch carving knife, but fled when she started screaming. He was given 16 months to run concurrently with a parole violation that he had already had and the sentence for that, to only serve 6 months in jail, because apparently there was some sort of error. However, though, why this man keeps getting lucky and getting out of jail earlier for the things that he's done when he's a clear threat, I don't understand. But also, sadly, this is part of why these things happen, because people who are dangerous are able to get out early for whatever reason, and then they just keep escalating and escalating and escalating like this guy does. Now, at some point during this time, Richard gets, quote, "born to raise hell," end quote, tattooed on his arm, which is significant and we'll see later in this episode. After he was released, he worked for 3 months as a driver for Patterson Meat Company. And it seemed like despite the many incidents that had occurred, he only ultimately got fired because he didn't show up for work. Go figure. And given him, I'm sure they were violent incidents too. I don't expect them to be tame by any means. At this point in time, Shirley had separated from him, and in January of 1966, she files not only for divorce, but full custody of their daughter, which, not surprising. That March, Richard commits burglary, and a warrant is issued for his arrest in Dallas, Texas. He is able to evade police and shortly after returns to his hometown of Monmouth, Illinois. There, he becomes a carpenter's assistant for a really short amount of time, just months, barely. And in April 2nd, 1966, Richard breaks into the home of 65-year-old woman named Virgil Harris. Not only does he rob Miss Harris, but he violently rapes her. Which, again, he somehow is able to escape a sentence, and then, kind of just deflects and, puts other ideas, I guess, into their head. He's good at talking somehow to them and getting out of these convictions. Then 11 days later, a barmaid named Mary Kay Pierce, who worked at his local tavern that he frequented, was found brutally beaten to death, and he was questioned for her murder. Police actually do suspect that he committed this murder. But once he realized that that was what was going on and he was being questioned in relation to that, he again was able to deflect and escape, and then fled to Chicago to stay with one of his other sisters. After some time, he then settles in and moves into a hotel in Skid Row that's actually near the Maritime Union Hiring Hall. And his brother-in-law, the husband of the sister who he stayed with, was able to get him a job as an apprentice seaman. But work was limited, and there were some instances where his job would be given to someone else or the job would be non-existent. And it was just a really frustrating, time because, obviously he's not able to get work. And even when it seems like he does, something happens. So, again, for a lot of people, though, that is a lot of stress, to have work be so scarce and so far and few in between. And then, for the opportunities that you do have, every single opportunity means so much. And then, to have these things go wrong, I can understand the frustration and the stress and the mental toll that can take on someone. Not to say that you go and do what he did. That's not how you deal with that. But I can understand how that's a lot, and also a lot for someone who's most likely dealing with a lot of trauma from an abusive late childhood, late, teen years and things like that. So, but again, no reason to go kill a bunch of people, okay? It's just not. It never is. Anyway, on July 13th, he is extremely angry because, again, another job has just fallen through. And he decides to go on a drinking spree. He then starts his day after, some drinking by robbing and sexually assaulting a 53-year-old woman named Ella Mae Hopper, who was just a local who was visiting the tavern, just so happened, that day where he met her. During this assault, he also takes her mail order .22 caliber gun. Later that night, at around 11 p.m., a 24-year-old Richard Speck breaks into a window of a townhome that was a shared house for the nursing students at South Chicago Community Hospital and heads for the bedrooms. What ensues next is hours of torture and violence.
I was recently watching Return to Oz and Nosferatu with my fiance, and I thought, wait, I just had on Broadview Press authors who wrote a vampire literature anthology and the iconic edition of The Wonderful Wizard of Oz. So I said to my fiance, you know what? I need to tell everyone who's listening to ITBR that BroadviewPress.com has everything from classic novels to discussions about vampire literature, vampires in film and TV, the philosophy of sports, Native American culture, horror. There is so much on Broadview Press's website. I urge you all right now, search broadviewpress.com. You will see that not only do they have books for college instructors, which if you do teach college, you better add them to your list because it's amazing, all the resources they have. But if you have just wandered around a bookstore or a library and thought, everyone always told me to read Moby Dick, but I don't know if I'm going to be able to fully understand it. BroadviewPress.com has you covered because they have amazing notes and sources to help you dissect that huge whale of a tale. See what I did there? I was just watching the Page Master, so there's a little Moby Dick reference. Head to BroadviewPress.com, use the exclusive code they gave us, Ivory Tower, 20% off your entire order. Yes, your entire order. Enjoy your reading, and please reach out to me and let me know what you're reading from Broadview Press. I would love to share it on social media.
Again, if you've seen American Horror Story, especially American Horror Story Murder House, you know how gruesome this gets. So once Richard breaks in through the window, like I said, he goes straight for the bedrooms and he knocks on the door. And one of the bedrooms that he knocks on, a 23-year-old Filipina exchange nursing student named Corazon Amaral. And she answers the door, and Speck immediately pulls out the .22 caliber gun that he stole off of Ella Mae Hopper and forces his way in. While wielding that gun, he forces the other Filipina exchange nursing students, 23-year-olds Merlita Gargulo and Valentina Passion, into a room where the American nursing students, 20-year-olds Patricia Matusek and Pamela Wilkening, and 24-year-old Nina Jo Schmale, who were sleeping at the time, and ultimately Speck wakes them up because of this. He then ties all the women's hands behind their backs with torn pieces of their bed sheets. And throughout this whole ordeal, Corazon Amaral actually is the lone survivor of this whole thing, and she does so by hiding under the bed when Speck wasn't looking. She had stated that the American nurses had said to her and the other women that it was important for them to just keep calm and to try and keep him calm, so that hopefully he wouldn't hurt them. And sadly, that was not at all the case. Over the next few hours, Speck would take the women one by one and brutally beat them and either stab them or strangle them to death. During this carnage, 3 other nursing students who lived there would arrive home and be brutally murdered. First was 21-year-old Suzanne Ferris. Speck stabbed her to death on the stairs as she was just walking up them to go up to her room. He attacked her, I think, from behind and stabbed her to death in the staircase. Next was 20-year-old Marianne Jordan. She was stabbed to death the moment she entered and shut the door of the townhome. Lastly, there was 22-year-old Gloria Jean Davy. She had been dropped off by her boyfriend. And of all of the women, it was confirmed that he specifically had raped and sexually assaulted Gloria before strangling her to death. It's at this point that, thankfully, Richard loses count of the amount of women that he had tied up and didn't notice that Corazon was missing or hidden under the bed, for that matter. So he then takes the cash from each of the women and flees the house. Corazon Amaral stays under the bed for hours after Speck leaves, and at about 6 a.m. she courageously emerges and crawls out from under the bed and out the window and goes to a neighbor and screams and calls for help. And I'm sure there are some people who are like, well, after she maybe thought he left or whatever, like, why didn't she leave sooner? Again, could you, try and put yourself in her shoes, even though you're never going to actually get that experience, but, just try to understand that she heard one by one the women that she lived with get brutally murdered and is just barely able to escape. I cannot imagine the absolute terror that would have come over her. And so the fact that she was able to come out from under the bed at any point, that soon, at, the next day, is, like I said, extremely courageous. Because again, I can't imagine the fear. I would think that I would personally just constantly think that he was outside and that he was waiting and that he wasn't really gone. But also really, how safe can you feel? Because this man came to your home, or at least the place that you're living. It's not like he did this somewhere else and you could escape. No, he picked you at the most safe place you have. Like, that, I can't imagine how vulnerable that feels, like I said, on top of just the absolute fear. Corazon then tells police that she remembers a specific detail about the man who did this to them. And it was that he had a tattoo on his arm that said, quote, "Born to raise hell," end quote. Now, because Richard had had prior arrests at the time, while he had this tattoo, that kind of made it easier for police to figure out and narrow down suspects. Also, he was there at the time, so they were pretty confident that it was him. But also, a week later, when the fingerprints from the crime scene came back as a match to his, they really knew it was him. Or at least, in technical terms, they had the burden of proof to take this to trial. And of course, media coverage plastered his image on all of the front pages of all of the newspapers. At this time, I would like to issue a trigger warning. There, for this very brief moment, are going to be discussions of suicide and manner in which suicide was committed. So if you want to skip ahead like maybe 10 seconds, I'll cue you back in. Just wait for that cue and you can come right back in. So as I mentioned, Richard does attempt suicide quite literally a few days after the murders. And again, seeing his face kind of plastered everywhere and knowing that his days were numbered, as a free man anyway. So he ultimately decides to slash his wrists. Okay, so that was a little bit shorter than I anticipated. So if you skipped ahead, you can come back right here. It's all fine. We're not talking about suicide graphically anymore. So Richard changes his mind and he calls for help and is taken to Cook County Hospital. Immediately, the medical staff recognize the tattoo from the news reports and reach out to the police. So Richard is arrested and taken into custody when medically cleared and discharged. He did have to have major surgery. So, again, once the doctors and all said that he was fine to be discharged, he was then taken into custody. After being deemed competent to stand trial for Richard began on April 3rd, 1967. Corazon Amaral was the star witness, and she was able to ID him in court to everyone. I mean, she had ID'd him already previously, but, in court, they ask you, of course, who was it? Is the person in this room? Can you point to them? And of course, it was monumental, or at least for the media, that she points to him. And honestly, I mean, that is the fact that she testified in court just shows her strength in and of itself at that point. I mean, because not only did this man terrorize her and she's trying to deal with the trauma of that, she, is able to tell police about what happened and then comes in and has to face him again, face to face, and is able to testify. Like, I think people really underestimate that, and I think that's just so unfortunate because the mental strength to be able, again, to face the person who terrorized you, the person who literally would have killed you, had they not checked under a bed. I mean, just, again, super, super courageous. Now, of course, Richard Speck claimed to have no recollection of the murders, and he blames that due to alcohol and drug intoxication. And I mean, that's, everybody's entitled to their defense just because you say you were high and drunk doesn't excuse you from actions you've committed. Again, and that's just to believe that he has no recollection and that he was that messed up, again. And also on the other side, he could have been. But like I said, at the end of the day, it doesn't excuse what he did. Now, of course, this was a high profile case. Media was swarming everywhere. All of the newspaper outlets were trying to get in and write about this. And to be honest, Richard Speck is considered to be one of the first serial killers in America. So it also kind of makes sense that, it would get this media attention. Now, the trial only lasted 12 days. And when the jury was sent to deliberate, they came back with a guilty verdict after only 45 minutes of deliberation. But again, with Corazon Amaru's ID in court and then his fingerprints at the crime scene, I mean, there was a lot of evidence against him. So it's in some ways it is surprising because that is really quick just to get 12 strangers to agree on one thing. But that also just shows, the strength of the evidence that was against him. Originally, after the deliberation and the verdict from the jury, Richard Speck was sentenced to death. However, his sentence was commuted pretty much to life. It seemed the sources were conflicting, but basically it looked like it was between 50 to 100 plus years, in prison. So again, basically life. And this happened in 1972 because the U.S. Supreme Court declared that capital punishment was unconstitutional. So therefore, if you got the death sentence, it was commuted and you got life. Obviously, things have changed since then, but in 1972, that's what happened. Richard was denied parole quite a few times before his death in 1991, and he died of a heart attack at the age of 49, which is semi-chilling just because it's the same cause of death that his father had. I mean, it was 4 years. He's 4 years ahead of his father in age, but the fact that that is what he died of. But also when you think about the amount of the alcohol consumption and drug consumption, unfortunately, that stuff really does take a toll on the body. And again, it is dependent on person to person. Some people do great their entire life with one thing. I mean, I have an uncle who smoked his entire life and died at 80 plus years. I want to say like close to 86, 87 or something like that. Or actually, no, he might have been, he was in his high 80s, early 90s, but then there are other people who never smoked a day in their life and, sadly die of lung cancer. So, it's all how, genetics and the way things affect you. But again, just interesting that was how they both died. Anyway, that is all I have for you, my loves. Thank you so much for joining me on this Father's Day. Again, happy Father's Day to all the dads out there. All you good ones are really doing a great job, and we appreciate you and your efforts. So again, shout out to all the dads, specifically my dad. Happy Father's Day, Dad. And until next time, my loves, do not forget to follow True Crime in Academia on social media at True Crime in Academia on Instagram, Threads, and TikTok. If you would like to listen to this episode ad-free, go to patreon.com/Ivory Tower Boiler Room and become a subscriber today, and you can get access to this episode and all of True Crime Academia episodes ad-free. Again, thank you all so much for listening. And as always, until next time, my loves, I will see you all later.
What does Sunset Boulevard, The Sound of Music, Vertigo, Snow White, The Wizard of Oz, and even Rebecca have in common? They've been covered on my friend Christian Garcia's podcast called That Old Gay Classic Cinema. Every time he is researching and deep diving a film with his guests, he asks the question, what's so queer about this film? You're going to love his podcast. You can listen to it on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, and follow him on Instagram and TikTok at That Old Gay Classic Cinema. I hope you all enjoy it as much as I do.